It was a quiet Sunday evening in the Midlands, December 1st, 1996. A couple drove through the winding lanes of Old Church, Worcestershire, just minutes from home, but only one of them would survive the journey. Lee Harvey, 25 years old, was found dying beside his car. His fiancée, Tracie Andrews, bloodied and frantic, claimed had been attacked by strangers in a fit of road rage. She described the assailant in vivid detail, a man named Jez, driving a Ford Sierra. She gave interviews, pleaded for help, and the nation listened. But the truth was far more disturbing. There was no stranger, no chase, no random violence. The killer was somebody Lee trusted, someone he loved. Over the next few weeks, Andrews would become a household name. Her tearful press conferences, her dramatic retelling of the attack, her insistence that Lee had been murdered by a stranger on a dark country road. It was a lie, a calculated, manipulative lie. This is the story of betrayal behind the headlines, a murder that gripped the UK, not because of who did it, but because of how far she went to hide it. From the roadside to the courtroom, from the lies to the confession. This is the case of Tracie Andrews, and the man whose life she took. Lee Harvey was 25 years old, a part-time bus driver from the West Midlands. Quiet, kind, and well liked by friends and family. He'd been dating Tracie for about a year, a former model turned care assistant. Their relationship was intense, volatile, marked by jealousy, frequent arguments, and emotional outbursts. Friends described the couple as passionate, but unstable. There were reports of shouting matches in public, threats, and even physical altercations. Lee had confided in loved ones that he was considering ending the relationship, but on December 1st, 1996, he agreed to meet Tracie for a drive to talk things through. They drove through the quiet lanes of Church, Worcestershire. What happened next would become one of the most sensational murder cases of the decade. According to Tracie, they were followed by two men in a Ford Sierra. She claimed the car forced them off the road, that one of the men, Jez, got out and stabbed Lee repeatedly in a frenzied attack. She described the assailant's hair, clothes, even his accent. She gave interviews, appeared on television, pleaded for help. But the evidence told a different story. There was no Ford Sierra, no strangers, no road rage. Forensic investigators found blood in Tracy's car boot. The murder weapon, a Swiss Army knife, was recovered. Witnesses heard a couple arguing, not a chase. And Tracy's injuries, self-inflicted. Lee Harvey had been stabbed over 30 times. The attack was brutal, personal, and deliberate. And the woman who claimed to be a victim was, in fact, the killer. December 1st, 1969. Late evening. Lee Harvey and Tracie Andrews are driving through the quiet lanes of Church. It's supposed to be a conversation, a chance to clear the air after weeks of tension. But the argument escalates, voices rise. The car pulls over. What happens next is brutal. Lee is stabbed over 30 times. The wounds are frenzied, targeted, many to her chest and neck. He collapses beside his car, bleeding out on the roadside. Tracie, covered in blood, returns home and calls for help. But she doesn't say she did it. She doesn't say it was an argument gone too far. Instead, she tells police they were victims of road rage attack. She describes the assailant in vivid detail, a man named Jez, driving a Ford Sierra. She says he forced them off the road, got out, and stabbed Lee in a fit of rage. She even claims he tried to attack her too. The media picks up the story. A young woman, traumatized, pleading for justice. Her face is everywhere. Her voice, trembling, fills the airwaves. We were just driving, and then this car came out of nowhere. But behind the tears and the trembling voice, something doesn't add up. There's no evidence of another vehicle, no tire marks, no witnesses saw a chase. The only voices heard were a couple arguing, and the injuries Tracie claimed to have suffered, self-inflicted. Forensic investigators find blood in the boot of Tracie's car. The murder weapon, a Swiss Army knife, is recovered. Her story begins to unravel. Lee Harvey didn't die at the hands of a stranger. He died at the hands of someone he loved, someone he couldn't let go, someone who chose murder and then chose to lie. In the hours after Lee Harvey's murder, Tracie Andrews didn't disappear. She didn't run. She stepped into the spotlight. With blood still on her clothes and bruises she claimed were from the violent struggle, Andrews told police and the public that she and Lee had been victims of a road rage attack. She described the scene in vivid detail. A Ford Sierra, two men, one named Jez. She said they'd been followed, forced off the road, and ambushed. That Lee had tried to protect her. That she narrowly escaped with her life. Again, them fatal words. We were just driving, and then this car came out of nowhere. This is repeated over and over. Her story was dramatic, emotional, and it spread quickly. Within days, Andrews was on national television, tearful, trembling, pleading for witnesses to come forward. She held press conferences, gave interviews, repeated the same story again and again. But behind the emotion, investigators saw something else: control, precision, a rehearsed narrative. The details she gave were too specific, too polished, and they didn't match the evidence. There were no tire marks, no signs of another vehicle, no witnesses saw a trace. The only voices heard were a man and a woman arguing, and the injuries Andrew claimed to have suffered, self-inflicted. But even as the evidence mounted, Andrew stuck to her vision. She doubled down. She cried harder. She blamed the media. She blamed the police. It wasn't just a lie. It was a performance. And for a time, it worked. In the hours after Lee Harvey's death, Tracie Andrews was treated as a survivor. A woman traumatized by a violent roadside attack. Her story was detailed, emotional, and for a moment it held. But detectives at West Mercia police weren't convinced. The crime scene didn't match her account. There were no tire marks, no signs of a chase, no evidence of another vehicle. Witnesses hadn't seen a Ford Sierra. They'd heard shouting, a couple arguing, then silence. Forensic teams began to piece together the truth. Blood was found in the boot of Tracie's car. Lee's blood. The murder weapon, a Swiss Army knife, was recovered, and the wounds on Tracie shallow, controlled. Yes, self-inflicted. Her story began to unravel. Detectives re-interviewed witnesses. They traced her movements, they examined her injuries, and they studied her behaviour. calm, composed, rehearsed. For press conferences, once seen as raw and emotional, now look staged. Her tears, her trembling voice, her pleas for help, they were part of a performance. We were just driving, and then this car came out of nowhere. Police confronted her with the evidence, the blood, the knife, the inconsistencies. But she held firm. She denied everything. It wasn't until weeks later, under mounting pressure and forensic scrutiny, that the Crown Prosecution Service charged her with murder. The investigation had exposed the lie, but the trial would reveal the motive and the full extent of the betrayal. On July 29th, 1997, Tracie Andrews stood at trial at Birmingham Crown Court for murder of Lee Harvey. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, family members, spectators, all waiting to hear how a woman who had cried for justice, who had stood before cameras, trembling and tearful, would answer for the evidence stacked against her. The prosecution laid out a meticulous case. Forensic experts took the stand. They described the blood patterns, how they told a story of proximity, of violence, of intent. They mapped the wounds, over 30 stab injuries, many to the chest and neck. Defensive wounds on Lee's hands, not on Tracie's. The murder weapon, a Swiss Army knife, was presented, cleaned, but not clean enough. Tracie's fingerprints, Lee's blood. The blade matched the wounds. The boot of her car held traces of blood. Her clothing, her shoes, her story. None of it held. Witnesses described the couple's relationship volatile, jealous, controlling. Friends recalled arguments that escalated into shouting matches, threats, possessiveness. Lee had confided in loved ones that he was planning to end things, that he was afraid. Andrews maintained her innocence. She repeated her story of road rage, of strangers, of a man named Jez. But under cross-examination, her narrative began to fracture. Her injuries didn't match her account. Her timeline shifted. Her demeanor changed. She grew defensive, evasive, and the jury watched as a woman who once cried for justice now struggled to hold her story together. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Each day the evidence mounted. Each day the mask slipped further. And on the final day, the jury returned their verdict guilty of murder. The judge delivered his sentence, life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 14 years. He described the crime as a savage and merciless attack, one that followed by a calculated and manipulative cover-up. He condemned the deception, the press conferences, the lies. Lee Harvey's family wept, not just for the loss of their son, but for the betrayal. For months they spent beside the woman who had taken his life, for the interviews, the visuals, the hope that justice would come from the outside, when the danger had been within all along. Justice had been served, but the damage was permanent. A young man was gone, a family shattered, and the woman who had orchestrated the lie was now behind bars. After her conviction in July 1997, Tracie Andrews began serving a life sentence at Bulwood Hall Prison. For years, she clung to her story, the road rage attack, the mysterious man named Jez, the strangers who vanished into the night. She maintained her innocence with a calm, calculated resolve. But Behind prison walls, the narrative began to shift. In private conversations with psychologists and prison staff, Andrew started to unravel the lie. She admitted to killing Lee Harvey. She claimed the attack happened during a heated argument, that she lost control, that she acted in self-defense. But the confession came years too late, and only after the evidence had left no room for denial. Her admission wasn't public, it wasn't broadcast. It didn't come with remorse or an apology. It came quietly, strategically, and for Lee's family, it felt hollow. They had endured the press conferences, the lies, the trial, the media circus. They had stood beside the woman who had taken their son's life, believing her, supporting her. And now, the truth came, not as closure, but as another betrayal. Some might say Tracy had served her time and deserved a second chance, but she ruined our lives. There is no second chance for Lee or for us, from the family statement given. In 2011, after serving her minimum term for 14 years, Tracie Andrews was released from prison. She changed her name, altered her appearance, moved to a new town, and married a man who knew her past. She was granted anonymity, a new life, protected from public scrutiny. Her release sparked outrage, not just because she was free, but because she was allowed to disappear, to reinvent herself, to walk away from a crime that had defined her. For Lee Harvey's family, the pain didn't end with a trial, it didn't end with a sentence, it lingered in every birthday missed, every holiday without him, every reminder that the woman who killed their son was now living under a new name, in a new town, with a new life. The justice system had done its part, but the emotional toll, the betrayal, the grief, the public manipulation left scars that no sentence could erase. Lee Harvey was 25 years old, a part-time bus driver from the West Midlands, quiet, kind, thoughtful. He wasn't the sort of man who sought attention, but he earned respect through how he treated others. His friends described him as a gentle, easygoing, someone who could diffuse tension with a smile. His family called him dependable, the kind of son who always come home. He lived in Marston Green near Birmingham. He loved football, music, and spending time with his younger siblings. He had a close relationship with his parents, who saw in him a steady presence, a young man with modest dreams, a stable job, and a home, maybe one day a family of his own. Lee met Tracie Andrews in 1995. Their relationship was intense from the start, passionate, volatile. Friends noticed the change in him. He grew quieter, more withdrawn. There were arguments, breakups, reconciliations, and through it all, Lee tried to make it work. He confided in loved ones that he was thinking of ending the relationship, that he felt trapped, that he was afraid, but he also felt responsible. He didn't want to hurt her. He didn't want to walk away. On December 1st, 1996, Lee agreed to meet Tracy for a drive, a conversation, a chance to clear the air. He never came home. The media focused on Tracy, her tears, her story, her deception. But behind the headlines was a young man whose life was stolen, not just by violence, but by betrayal. Lee Harvey wasn't just a victim, he was a son, a brother, a friend, and for those who loved him, the pain didn't end with the trial, It didn't end with a sentence. It lingers in birthdays missed, in empty chairs, in quiet moments where his absence is loudest. His mother, Maureen, described the agony of standing beside Tracy at press conferences, believing her, supporting her, not knowing that the woman beside her had taken her son's life. From the family statement, we lost Lee, but we also lost trust. We stood beside the woman who killed him. We believed her, and that betrayal is something we carry every day. Lee's funeral was held in Birmingham. Hundreds attended. Friends, family, colleagues. The grief was raw, the disbelief overwhelming. His coffin was carried by loved ones who had once expected to see him marry, raise children, grow old. In the years that followed, Lee's family campaigned for justice, not just in the courtroom, but in the public memory. They wanted people to remember Lee, not for headlines, not for lies, but for man. Lee Harvey's story is often overshadowed by the spectacle of the case, but here we remember him, not for how he died, but for how he lived. The murder of Lee Harvey was not just a crime of violence, it was a crime of betrayal, of manipulation, of deception so calculated it fooled the public, the press, and even those closest to the killer. Tracie Andrews didn't just take a life, she constructed a life that lived in headlines, that echoed through press conferences, that cast her as the victim while Lee's family stood beside her, unaware that the danger had never come from the outside. The case exposed more than a killer. It exposed the fragility of trust, the power of performance, and the devastating cost of coercive control. In the years since his death, his family has fought to preserve that memory, to speak truth in the face of spectacle, to remind the world that behind every headline is a human life. And as we close this chapter, we reflect not just on the crime, but on the silence that follows. The silence in a home where laughter used to live. The silence in a family photo missing one face. The silence that lingers long after the cameras fade. Justice was served, but justice is not the end. It is a beginning, a chance to learn, to see the signs, to ask harder questions, to protect those who feel trapped, unheard of, or afraid. Because the truth is not always loud. Sometimes it's quite quiet. Sometimes it's hidden behind a smile. And sometimes it's buried beneath a lie. So convincing. It takes everything to uncover it. Lee Harvey's story reminds us that truth matters, that memories matter, and that behind every disturbing truth is a voice that deserves to be heard. This has been The Road Rage Lie. You've been listening to Disturbing Truths. I'm Andrew. Stay safe, stay aware, and stay with me. We'll be back next week with another case, another reckoning, and another story that deserves to be told.